You know, life has a way of surprising us. We've all had unexpected moments that really end up impacting who we are. I'm Chavie Brooke, and let me tell you, I've had my fair share of these moments. On Totally Unexpected, I don't just interview my guests. We have long, meaningful conversations to explore the twists and the turns that change their lives. You won't only be hearing from the guest, you'll be hearing from me and my thoughts and reflections, just as I would be doing in real life. These aren't traditional interviews, they're conversations about struggle, growth, and the moments that make us human. We all just want to feel connected. At least I do. And if we end up feeling a little less alone, that would make me so happy. Hello. Welcome back to Totally Unexpected. I happen to be recording from Eureka, Montana, 6.5 hours north of Bozeman, right up at the Canadian border. And we are here because it's spring break. Yes, it's perfect timing for spring break. I actually share the process of figuring out how to navigate spring break so close to Pesach in this week's Substack essay. So check it out if you haven't seen it yet. And by the way, every Tuesday, I release a new Substack essay. And if you subscribe, it will come straight into your inbox. So you should, if you haven't yet. And it's really fun. It's where I share like the messy, wonderful happenings in my life. And Substack's a really fun platform, and I think you should all be a part of it. It's blowing up and it's great. So this week's episode, we have a super fabulous guest. But before I introduce her, I want to remind you that at the end of the episode is where we do our voice note section. This week's prompt was Pesach hacks and tips. So listen for it after the interview. And if you aren't familiar, the voice note section is where we get to engage with each other, and it's really fun. I release a prompt on my Instagram stories about once a week, and it gives you the opportunity, you as the listeners, to submit a voice notes with a response or a hot take. It's really fun. I know for a lot of you, it will be out of your comfort zone, but it's okay. Don't be shy. I want to hear your voice notes. I love hearing them. So look out for those prompts and participate. It's really worth it. I also want to share that just recently we are on YouTube. If you prefer getting your content there, we're slowly but surely uploading a lot of content. You can see some short videos. And we are also curating playlists for Spotify and YouTube based on topics. So lots going on here in Totally Unexpected land. And just remember, every time you share, you comment, you rate and review, it just does wonders for us. And it allows this podcast to get shared, and other people can notice it and see it and love it. So just takes a second, do your part, and it really means a lot. And without further ado, I would love to introduce to you the guest of this episode, none other than Rivkah Slonim. Rivkah Slonim is really a role model of mine and someone that I really look up to. She's a shlichah on campus in Binghamton University. She's an author of 3 books, most recently the book Holy Intimacy, co-written by Sarah Morozow. It's a book about the heart and soul of Jewish marriage, and it goes through so many topics, and it's really an amazing resource. And she's a self-proclaimed Chassidic feminist, and you'll hear all about that on the episode. And just a really grounded, smart, intelligent, amazing person. And I think you'll learn a lot from this episode, and I really, really hope you enjoy it. If you want to sponsor, please reach out. I think it's not a secret that podcasts are funded through sponsorships and advertisements. There's no secret way to go about it. And I would love to partner with all of you and any of you. please reach out. All my contact information is in the show notes. And we're very grateful to all our partnerships and all our sponsorships. How are you? I am so excited to get to talk to you. I'm so honored.
Okay, I'm going in totally without any...
We're going in blind.
I'm going in blind.
That's very brave, but don't worry. It's going to be great.
Yeah, I don't listen to a lot of podcasts, not because I'm not interested. I just plus don't have time. So it's not my world.
You know, I was just talking to my husband last night, and he reminded me that my father and your husband went on Rivkah Shlichus together.
Oh, yeah.
In Montana, which is Rivkah Shlichus is when yeshiva students go and visit remote locations where there's no real Jewish infrastructure. And my father and your husband did that together, I think maybe even 2 years. 1 year or 2 years.
I'm not sure
I don't know.
They did it 2 years, but they certainly did it 1 year. And that was a very formative experience.
Yes. And then I think they printed Tanya after you were married and my parents were married. And the Tanya's dedicated. It says, you and your husband, my parents, and me and your son, because we were already born when the Tanya was printed. So I thought that was a really fun connection.
Indeed.
I'm a little nervous because I have so many things that I want to talk to you about. So I'm like, how am I going to get it all done? But we're just going to take it one step at a time. And
always a good system.
Always a good system. Yeah, because there's just so many things that you just are so prolific in. And I have like all these questions that I have stored from just living life and interacting with my community. And I'm like, oh, Rivkah's going to be the best person to ask these questions to. But before we even get there, I always love to hear and know a little bit about you as a person, not what you've accomplished, not what you do, but who you are. And that's one of my favorite parts of a conversation. So I know you grew up in Crown Heights, one of the Crown Heights royalty families. And I would love to hear, as a young girl, what your experience was, what that was like.
As is very often the case, I totally did not appreciate what I had, I think.
Yeah.
I always felt very fortunate, very lucky. I grew up in a loving home, not only with wonderful parents, but enriched by wonderful grandparents. We lived in the same home. There were another set of parents and very, very tremendous influences on my life. And that just amplified everything. I loved school. I loved Beis Rivkah. I still do love reading.
Yeah.
I still enjoy writing. I enjoy interacting with people. I just had a very, very magical, blessed, privileged childhood, really, in the fullest sense of the word. Yeah, I mean, were there things that were ever annoying or upsetting? Of course.
Yeah.
In the aggregate, when I look back, it was just a very, very special time. And growing up, of course, in Crown Heights, in close proximity to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and in those years where it seemed like almost every time there was a Farbringen, a very large gathering of Hasidim, Rebbe would suggest, and I don't know if that's the right word, but he would suggest a new project.
Mm-hmm.
And he expected action on that suggestion.
Yeah.
And he expected monumental action. And if I look back at it now as an adult, I think he was really reforming the gestalt of Chabad Chassidim, because he was taking a motley crew of refugees, basically, whose experience until they had come to this country was about remaining alive, both physically and spiritually. And what he was saying was, you can't just worry about yourselves anymore.
Yeah.
You've made it to the other side, and now you're going to become my army. You're going to become my hands and feet. You're literally going to become my foot soldiers in taking on what is an even more formidable challenge than being hunted down.
Right.
And that is assimilation. And I
Yes.
think that I can't speak for the adults, but I think I'm correct in assuming that when the Rebbe spoke about there being a fire in the Jewish world, for instance, and how when you escape a home that's on fire, you don't dawdle. You don't take a lot of time. You take what's most precious, you act with urgency and with alacrity. And I can still close my eyes and hear the Rebbe talking about the house on fire. And I certainly didn't understand what he was saying, but I would be very shocked if most of the adults in the room actually understood the profundity and the urgency that the Rebbe brought to this, because it still wasn't yet quite as obvious as it obviously became today in the decades later. So it was a very heady time because there were constantly new things to do, new ways of being, new ways of thinking. I was privileged in growing up in a home that was extremely, you could say, on the front lines with these kinds of things.
So you felt it. Did you feel it when things were like when the Rebbe would say, okay, here's a new project? What was the energy in your home around that? Did you feel the energy of that being internalized?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was very concretized. Depending on what the project was, it could show up as something that took over our dining room and our living room.
Right.
And not to mention the headspace of my parents and grandparents. Urgent calls, urgent letters and answers coming from the Rebbe's office and his head secretary, back and forth. Yeah, I feel like my childhood was suffused with that. And a hallmark of that was urgency. The Hebrew word mahir, which the Rebbe wrote on probably scores and scores of communications with my grandfather, with my mother, which means immediate and urgent and quick. So that, I think, has kind of made its way into my consciousness and the way I operate. It's like, it has to be done yesterday.
Right. Did you ever feel as a child, maybe not for you in particular, but did you ever feel pressure? Like, oh my gosh, there's so much, I have so much responsibility, or your parents had so much responsibility, and did it sometimes feel overwhelming?
Honestly, no. It felt energizing. It felt exciting. It felt mind expanding. And I don't think I'm trying to like massage the facts or whitewash history.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really remember it feeling overwhelming.
Yeah. Well, that's really a beautiful thing, and credit to your parents for having that energy around it. And I can relate similarly. Like, I grew up on Shlichus, and yeah, sometimes it was busy and there was always things to do, and there was never like, I was just reflecting with somebody, I don't remember who, but I was like, I don't think I ever remember being bored as a child. Like, I don't think I've ever felt bored. So that's just an interesting reflection. But somehow my parents managed to infuse how we lived with such a positive energy that, thank God, all 9 of us are doing the same thing. Like, we didn't come away with this like very negative or resentful experience. It sounds like that was similar for you. Like, it was just exciting and motivating.
Yeah, it wasn't an overlay. It was part of our essential identity.
Right.
It was our core. It was who we were, why we were, what we were.
Your grandmother is a daughter of a Rebbe, no? Like
the Kapichnitz
Rebbe.
Very good. You can, not many people can easily articulate that name.
Okay. And that's also a huge thing in and of itself, like that dynasty and being part of such a holy and special existence. How did that play out in your family? Was it very felt? Was it something that was on the forefront?
That's really an interesting question, not one I expected or have been asked by many people. but it's a very astute question, which I will try to answer honestly.
Okay.
I was always aware of the fact that my grandmother was the daughter of the Kapichnitz Rebbe, that she carried herself in a very distinctive way. She really had the carriage of royalty. I'm trying to remember, but I think there was some dissonance surrounding like being proud of being a Kapichnitz Enikel, and also, well, my entire identity is being a Chabad
Right.
Chassidista. So
Yes.
I have to somehow find a way of negotiating the Kapichnitz side
Both
away.
of those things.
And obviously, as you grow older, you understand that it's not a contradiction. You know, the Rebbe went to be Menachem Ba'avel, my great grandfather, the Kapichnitz Rebbe, when he was sitting Shiva. It was one of two times that he left 770 Crown Heights, let us say, and that he didn't go to Camp Gan Yisrael. In other words, that, and it wasn't a medical thing. So it was a very, very big deal. And my grandmother and her father are, from the Ruzhner dynasty, and the Tzemach Tzedek actually tore Kriya. He actually showed external signs of mourning when the Ruzhner Rebbe passed.
Wow.
So there was always this connection. As a child, I didn't quite understand it. And one of the, a bit of the fallout of my lineage is that instead of speaking the typical Litvish Yiddish that Chabad, Lubavitch people usually sport, I speak a Polish Yiddish.
Oh, wow. And interesting.
My kids don't like when I say Rebbe, but that's the only way that I know how to say the word.
Yeah.
That was the Yiddish I was brought up with. That was the Yiddish my grandmother spoke and how she had raised my mother, how she raised us. So that was part of that legacy. And in school, when we were young, we used to translate every word from every verse in Chumash, in the Torah, into Yiddish and then into English. And I had to constantly put tremendous effort in articulating the Yiddish word in the way other people named it, as opposed to the way that came naturally.
It was like an extra step.
Yeah, and it really soured me on wanting to do this in class.
Oh,
so that was a little bit of a, something that I carried with me. But that's really the only negative. My grandmother, I was very young when my great-grandfather passed away. I think I remember seeing him, but after all these years, it's hard to know if I did see him or
pictures.
It's a figment of my imagination.
Yeah.
But I was a little bit over 2 years old when he passed away. But my brother, my oldest brother, is named for him. I have cousins named for him. He's a huge part of who we are. My grandmother always spoke about her father the most reverential terms. So did my grandfather, his son-in-law. So it was special. And I also saw the way in which the Rebbe related to my grandmother in a very, very special way. And she never really went for dollars. During those 9 years that the Rebbe distributed dollars and blessings alongside with the dollars, she never accepted a dollar without giving the Rebbe a blessing in return.
Oh, wow.
And if you watch the clips, you could see it's almost like the Rebbe is waiting for it.
Yeah, it's like this is
and there were some special exchanges that she had with the Rebbe. One of those was after the Rebbe had his heart attack in the 80s. She was very, very concerned about his keeping up the rigorous schedule that he had always maintained. So she wrote to him asking him to please care for his health since the world needed him so badly. And she said, I know that you won't take counsel from me, but I'm including a letter that your father-in-law wrote to my father.
Oh, wow. Okay, so we have like documentation.
Telling him to take care with his health. That was, one example of these kind of special exchanges.
Yeah. And your mother had a very special relationship with the Rebbetzin.
She did. That was mostly because she helped my grandfather in everything that he did. At a certain point, the Rebbe asked my grandfather to really be attentive to all things having to do with the Rebbetzins' health and adjacent needs. And he explained that he did not have the time to do what needed to be done. It was his responsibility, so he deputized my grandfather to do so. And that has to do
What an
with
honor.
that my grandfather had spent some years as a very young child in the Frierdiker Rebbe's home, in the Rebbe's predecessor's home. His father was murdered when he was very, very young. He was born to his mother at an advanced age, and she was really having a lot of trouble raising a young, rambunctious child. The other siblings were much older. And this was kind of like a surprise
little gift.
Baby, gift. And so he ended up living in the Frierdiker Rebbe's home. And Rebbetzin and her sister, were kind of like his older sisters. So there was already this relationship.
Yeah. Wow. Do you have any memories of the Rebbetzin that you feel comfortable sharing? Because it's, for us, like, we don't have that experience, and it's always like, you get these little snippets of information and you like drink it up because we're so connected, but almost without any context.
So again,
you were very young.
Totally did not appreciate, what
you had, what was going on.
For me, it was like very natural to burst into my grandparents' home at any time, any day. But I could tell as soon as I opened the door, if my Zayda was speaking to the Rebbetzin, I could just tell.
You knew.
And then I would try to keep it down. On a few occasions, I had the opportunity to bring mishlach manot, gifts of food on Purim.
Yeah.
There were a few times where I brought a cake. My grandmother used to bake a very special nut tort.
Oh my gosh. My grandmother also made this amazing nut cake. It's nothing like it.
Yeah, nobody has ever been able to replicate it. I wonder if it's the same nut cake.
Yeah.
But so on special occasions, my grandmother would bake one for the Rebbe, the Rebbetzin to enjoy. So a few times I brought the cake over. Before we got married, my husband and I went to the Rebbetzin for a conversation and for her to give us a blessing for our marriage. And my one distinctive exchange with the Rebbetzin had to do with a conversation I was thrust into. There were certain customs, certain minhagim surrounding marriage that she wanted my mother to keep. And then when I got engaged, she reminded my grandfather that she also wanted my mother's children to keep. Maybe all of his grandchildren to keep these customs. And there was one in particular that I was very exercised about. And I was really not happy to do that. And that was to not have anything on my head before the chuppah, not to wear like a hat or any kind of distinctive headpiece. And I was crying and carrying on like it was really a terrible thing.
Yeah.
And of course, my mother had told my grandfather that she didn't know what to do with me, unbeknownst to me. And so once when I was in my grandfather's office, and before I knew it, he had dialed the Rebetzin's number and handed me the receiver. And I was really, really, really angry and upset and flummoxed and embarrassed.
Oh my gosh, that is a big deal.
She was very gracious. And then she said, I hear that you're upset. And I said, no, I'm not upset. And
I'm not gonna admit that. No way.
She didn't buy that. She said, no, I hear you're upset. Why are you upset?
Yeah.
And so I said to her, well, I just don't want to be that different. Yeah. I'm already going to be different in other ways. I've agreed to do that. This is just another layer. I really don't want to be different. And she said to me, "Sehr modern zu sein anders." It's very different. I'm sorry, it's very modern to be different. And with that, she kind of completely, overturned the paradigm for me. And I think that she knew a little bit about me, and she knew that being different
that would speak to you.
That would speak to me.
Oh my God, it definitely would speak to me because I'm like, I'm all about that.
So I thought, I think back about that, often, and just how
Wow.
brilliant and on the mark that was, and also just how profound it is that it's okay. It's
Yeah.
okay to do
It's
something
okay to be
differently.
different.
Nothing's going
Yeah.
to happen.
Did you, in your school age years, like elementary school, high school, obviously later on in life, I think you coined the term like Chassidic feminism, right? Which we'll get to. But that just doesn't happen out of nowhere. When you were a young girl in school, were you feeling like these thoughts that were a little bit different, or that you were feeling passionate about the role of women and how we show up, and wanting to discover that more? Did that at all play a role in your high school years? Did you feel different than what the school was providing?
Actually, it's the contrary.
Mm,
It was nothing in my childhood, my upbringing, that would indicate that because I was a woman, there were less opportunities for me.
right.
I grew up with very, very strong role models, both male and female.
Mhm.
My mother was very, very involved in communal affairs. If anything, she had a much higher profile, public profile than my father did.
Mm,
I was very enamored of a sister of my grandfather, Panteleka Karasik, who was a formidable scholar, a very, very pious woman. And later I learned more about her learning and her davening and how the Frierdiker Rebbe actually answered questions in Hasidus for her. But
mm.
without even knowing these details, just she was like a role model. And it was only when I came onto campus and was assaulted
Interesting.
with all kinds of questions slash assertions about the lifestyle that I led,
Mm.
that
That kind of
I
opened
began,
up that
yeah, it
whole.
really, really raised consciousness within me as to, okay, these snippets of Mishnayos or Gemara that people are throwing at me, how do I reconcile that with the lived experience?
Yeah.
What do they mean?
I find that very fascinating that actually your young adult years, no, that wasn't something that you were thinking about, but only coming out into the more secular, assimilated world did you have to start thinking about that, which actually brings me to my next question of, you get married. How soon after do you go out on Shlichus to Binghamton? I want to hear about that because, like, 40 years ago, it looked very different than it does today. I think there were very few rabbis and rebbetzins on campus. So, and how did you end up in Binghamton specifically?
Before I share that, just want to
Yeah,
go back to what you said earlier. It wasn't just that I wasn't thinking about these things. It
yeah,
was that my experience was quite the contrary.
right.
Like when the Rebbe was rolling out these new projects, it wasn't like he was speaking just to the men.
Mhm.
We were just as involved.
Right. You had no context for what,
I never felt the
yeah,
bringers were just for men. I felt they were for both of us.
interesting. Yeah.
That was just the lens through which I saw things. And then it almost became like, how dare you be happy in your life as it is? How dare you assert that you have value and purpose? How dare you assert
Mm.
that different can still be equal within the larger rubric?
Oh,
You're
wow.
just like a slave smiling at the sun. You just don't know better, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow. Yes.
I just want to say it wasn't just that I wasn't thinking about it. It was that my experience was contrary to the
Exact opposite.
that
Yeah.
I was being held back or somehow afflicted
Yeah.
by a system that was rigged against women.
So when you're confronted with this, you're young, you're fresh, and you're new, and you're on this campus, and all of a sudden you're being exposed, or people assume what life is like for you and the world is like for you. How did that feel? Did it like upend everything?
It was very surprising.
Yeah.
It definitely put me into a state of disequilibrium.
I can imagine.
Thank goodness I had very strong mooring, very strong roots. So I wouldn't say that it upended me, but it definitely created turmoil, and it definitely set me on a journey of exploration,
Yeah.
learning, analysis. I'm very grateful to the relatives and the people in my life who did not lose patience with my incessant questioning and my pushing back, etc., etc. But I was very, very privileged again to be surrounded with people who I could speak with and question and ask, and till I was able to find, more clarity. Yeah.
Did you ever in your research experience a feeling like, oh, wait a second, maybe there's truth to what people are saying about women? Because I'll tell you a personal story, which I would really love to hear your take on. It's very recently, actually, a couple months ago. I was in the kitchen and a woman in my community is helping me, and we're very close. She's a doctor. She's obviously very highly educated. And we've known each other since we moved to Bozeman. So, 19 years, we're connected. She very much buys into and sees how women's roles, like, doesn't walk around thinking that Orthodox women are oppressed or we're just in the kitchen with our aprons and barefoot. Like because she sees, like she has context, she sees, me and many other examples of that. And we're talking in the kitchen and she turns to me and she's like, Chavie, like, I really understand that the Torah and the way we live upholds women and we have our special roles and we have our unique abilities. And, I get that, but I'm really, really stuck on the fact that women can't be part of a Beis Din. They're not kosher witnesses. And there are many places in the Torah where I feel that women are just considered, I don't want to even say less than, but like not trustworthy or we can't handle it or all that kind of stuff. She's like, she's like, I've known you for 19 years and nothing has ever been able to reconcile that for me. And I turned to her and I said, I don't know. Like, I can't answer that question for you. Like I agree. I don't know the answer to this. And I said, I'm like, I am let's explore this together. Like, let's figure this out. And I am trying to, and I think you're like a very good person to ask that question. Did you come across that? Do you have feelings around that? I'm curious.
Yes, and more yes. And kudos to you for saying to her, I don't know, but let's explore this together. I love that. That takes strength and integrity, which you...
She called me later. We finished cooking, and then a couple hours later, she calls me. She's like, Chavie, I just want you to know that when you told me that you understand what I'm saying and you didn't try to give me some canned answer and you really listened to me, she's like, you don't know how much that meant to me.
Sure.
And I was like, oh, Hashem, thank you for putting the right words in my mouth, And they were genuine, obviously.
Honesty and integrity, I think, are the most important basis of all of our interactions. And when they're not there, it's very obvious and it doesn't really have efficacy. So yes, I mean, first of all, the Torah is addressed to men.
Yes.
You and your wife and your handmaiden and your servant and your animals, etc., etc. Okay. So first off, there's that.
Yes, at its core. And she said that. She's like, Torah is talking to men. Like, that's just the reality.
And then, you have what you brought up, that a woman can't be a Rav in terms of the fact that a Rav means a Dayan, a judge. And she can't be a judge because she can't be a witness. And why can't she be a witness? It's Gzeres HaKasuv, which means it's just what God says.
Right.
And anything we can say to analyze this is not the essential answer. We might be able to find some insights I'm happy to share, but it's something we have to accept. As is the fact that a woman essentially, from the perspective of Torah, goes from her father's authority to her husband's authority in terms of vows,
that hurts a little,
in terms of vows, in terms of ownership of property, and so on and so forth, unless there are special arrangements made, which can be made, but the default is that she goes from her assets
property
belong to her to her father, and then they belong to her husband. So there's a few things that we can say. One is that, generally speaking, the woman's role seems more aligned with what I'll call systemic functions, and the male role seems more aligned with particulars. And actually, the Rebbe teaches this in a sicha we just did through Project Likkutei Sichas, where the Rebbe says that the reason why women don't have an obligation in positive commandments that are time-bound, mitzvah seishas man grama, is because she operates on a level that kind of transcends time. It's not something that she has to plug into in the same way that men need to. Now, in that same sicha, the Rebbe says something that I can still remember hearing that in real time.
Yeah.
Where the Rebbe says that, a man and woman are both halves of one soul, of one neshama, and that long before they meet each other, what one does is already impacting what the other does, which is very,
mind-blowing,
very profound,
yeah,
and kind of mind-boggling. And so what he's saying is that when the man does his work, he's including her, and when the woman does her work, she's including him. And that brings me to another point, which is when we take these things and unplug them from the larger context and the larger system, in and of themselves, they don't make sense. But when you plug it into the larger system, when you understand that what he's doing encompasses her and what she's doing includes him, you have the ultimate intersectionality. It's a very different way of looking at life. And so I think in the final analysis, yes, I think any thinking person is going to think about these things and might be bothered by these things. But if Hasidus teaches us anything, it's that it's not about what you have come to take from life. It's what you have come to give towards life, towards the cosmic plan, towards what Hashem wants and needs from you. And in that respect, there's total equality between women and men.
Right.
So while from the Western point of view, it's all about access and posturing and position, from the perspective of Judaism, it's all about service. And we do not lack opportunities to serve. And we do not lack opportunities to serve in the most systemic and basic and overarching ways. Yeah, I think about these things. And yes, I don't always have a particularly satisfying way of understanding it.
Right.
And I give the Talmudic sages more credit than to believe for a nanosecond that they thought that women's intellect was inferior to men. Everything about their teachings has taught me that they were prescient and way ahead of the curve in terms of what they taught. So it can't possibly be a statement about women's inferior intellect. It might be more about sociological factors, the fact that women didn't often have the same opportunities to study, just putting a meal on the table, just grinding the wheat that you needed to make one loaf of bread.
It's all consuming.
Hours and hours and hours. So we're being a little short-sighted or not quite intellectually honest when we seek to overlay the current sociological constructs on the system that is the Torah. And yet, on the other hand, what's fascinating is that, I don't know if you've been following this, but there've been like a flurry of articles and podcasts and columns recently, like in the last 18 months, about the feminization of the workplace and the Western world, so on and so forth.
And like the struggle of men stepping into their masculinity, right? Everything's become more feminized.
Yes.
And that's like making the world kind of off kilter. It's not really working. It's really fascinating,
I think that it behooves us to think about that also. Again, if it's about me, that's one perspective. If it's about a larger system, then I have to be attentive to that with a different lens. And yes, Judaism does very much see a place for men, a place for women, and they're joining in tandem to fulfill what it is that God created this world for.
Yeah. I really appreciate what you said in the beginning, which was like at the core of it, there needs to be a little bit of this like acceptance. We don't really are not going to always have like the satisfactory answers. My question is, let's say, okay, so we understand the global and we understand the bigger construct. Let's say personally, like you're born with a tendency to be more of a scholar, more biased towards a more masculine role, and you feel suffocated or not understood because of the guidelines and the parameters put in place for women. How are you to navigate that? If you're being pulled to more of a masculine energy or more of like a public role or more of a scholar or more of, and you want to do the things that you feel pulled and called to do those things, but you are living a Torah life and you are in this value system at the same time.
I think it's actually a fallacy that a woman can't come into her own as a scholar, as a teacher, as a communicator, as an activist, as a mover and shaker.
Which I think that you showed us.
Within the confines of Torah and halacha. Yes, there are always going to be things that she will not do.
Yeah.
But I do not believe for just even a moment that would hamper her coming to fruition in many of the ways that you mentioned. I would say that she has to find a life partner that is not threatened by that.
Right.
And that appreciates that and supports that. But other than that, I don't see really where the limitation is.
So I agree with you in like the situation we are now, but let's say 40 years ago, do you think it was harder? Do you think it was more revolutionary or more rebellious to do that?
Yes.
And I think that you probably experienced that. How did you navigate? Was there pushback? Was there like, you stay in your lane, like, did you feel any of that?
Not a whole lot, but I do remember one very particular night when I received a call from a older shliach, an older emissary of the Rebbe. And I don't remember the exact words he said, but his message was that he had seen a piece of our Chabad of Binghamton stationery. And he saw my name listed as co-director. He never heard of such a thing. Women are not directors, women are not co-directors, etc., etc. He was extremely exercised about this. And I let him just talk. And again, I don't remember the exact words, but I do remember very carefully not saying, you're right, or we're going to change this.
Right.
I don't know if I thanked him for calling or I just said, I hear you.
I hear you.
Night.
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly how it went. But in my mind, this was something that my husband and I had done together. I did not decide on that stationery alone. I did not see how that contravened anything that the Rebbe had taught. If anything, it seemed to me that it sent out couples for the express purpose of their working together. And that is one of the very distinctive hallmarks of a Chabad house, that it's run by a couple, not by one or the other. To be fair and to be honest, I think that he represented more than just himself. And I think there were a lot of people that thought that way.
Yeah. And he was just the one to make the phone
that
call.
saw what we today call Shlichus, not as Shlichus, but as the wives of Shluchim. And the Rebbe really changed that when one year, and I can't remember the exact year now, so I'm a little embarrassed, but one year during the Kinus HaShluchim, during the gathering for the Shluchim, the male emissaries, where he distributed a Chassidic mimer, a Chassidic discourse, and this was considered one of the most significant things that could happen when the Rebbe spends time, hours of his precious time, giving each person a copy of this Chassidic discourse. This was not a pedestrian act. There was tremendous weight and gravitas in that. And then, to the great surprise of everybody. He asked for the Shlichus who were in New York, who had accompanied their husbands, to come by because he wanted to give them the same Hasidic discourse. And I think that changed things. I see that as a watershed event.
Yeah.
So yeah, things were different.
Yeah.
Things were different, but at the same time, there were always shluchos doing like changing the world, changing their continent, changing their country. I mean, there are shluchos that heeded the Rebbe's call and left their homes to take posts in places like Tunisia and Morocco and Italy and the United Kingdom and Australia and France. That was long before my time.
Right.
And these women were power and are, some of them, for many, many more years, absolute powerhouses. And nobody ever thought that they were just
Along for the ride.
along for the ride or
Yeah.
along to support their husband's work.
Yeah.
But I guess formalizing it.
Yeah. What do you think the source of that discomfort was? Like, is it threatening? Is it like, what would make someone worry about that?
Well, there's plenty in halacha about a woman not being in a place of leadership. And
Right.
exactly
Which goes back to our question, right? Like,
what that means and how it
yeah.
manifests. And so
Yeah.
I think that was probably where it was coming from, like this visceral knee-jerk reaction to what
To
might be on a
uphold.
slippery slope.
What are your thoughts on the slippery slope?
My thoughts on a slippery slope are not seminal. Halachas are, on the other hand.
Yeah.
And we see that there's a lot of attentiveness to confusion surrounding Jewish law. Like where there might be confusion, halacha tends to address that confusion prophylactically. There are a
Yeah.
lot of examples about that. It's nothing to do with, gender. Where there might be room to think that a certain action might cause erosion against a necessary bulwark, there's attentiveness to that. So I think one does have to worry about the slippery slope. And on the other hand, one does have to worry and be attentive to a changing world and an eternal Torah that has to accompany people in a constantly changing world. And we were very, very privileged that we had this anchor, the Rebbe. We have this anchor, the Rebbe in our lives, the Rebbe's teachings in our lives. And there are certain things that only a tzaddik, a righteous person of that stature, can create a shift that's going to be that monumental.
Yeah. Because I oftentimes feel like I agree in the sense like the slippery slope, like a lot of times you see in halacha, right? There's like guardrails. You can't do this because it will help you not go and do this. So I definitely understand the concept, but sometimes I feel like the slippery slope is used. It almost feels like we don't trust that a person can make good decisions. Or I mean, I even feel like in the bigger context, like the world looked at the Rebbe and said, how are you putting shluchim out in the world?
That's right.
In the secular communities, a slippery slope. Aren't they going to get assimilated and affected? So oftentimes you hear, oh, don't do this, or, you're going to go and do this next. And it feels just like this lack of trust in our character or lack of foundation that we can make good choices.
I don't know if it's lack of trust or being skeptical about foundation as much as it's a keen understanding of human nature.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, you mentioned something about how radical it was to put young couples into communities where there was nothing, there was no infrastructure, and there were no people around them to bolster their way of life. And in fact,
Correct.
There is this famous letter. It seems that somebody wrote to the Rebbe asking him why he didn't put more couples on college campuses. And he delineated 3 reasons. And one of those was that it's a very, very big responsibility.
Yeah.
So, the Rebbe was a radical traditionalist and a traditional radical.
Yeah, I love that.
But not, pedestrian people cannot make these determinations.
Right.
If the Rebbe tells you to do it, that tells you can do it, then you can do it. And that's, an iron bridge so you can take to your next destination.
Yeah. So going back to your early days in Binghamton, take me back. Okay, you get married, and what happens next?
Well, even when we first met on our first date, we both, kind of spoke about this is what we hope
Yeah,
to do.
yeah. This is like you wanted to do this.
Yes, but we didn't know
Okay.
what that would look like. We didn't
Yeah.
know what form it would take. Also, Shlichus, the mission of Chabad centers, was not stratified and diversified like it is today. It wasn't like
Right.
young people thought about, oh, I want to work with teens. I want to work with young
Yeah.
professionals. I want to work with,
Yes. There
I
was no
want to work
categories.
there were no categories. It was just,
Yeah.
you were going to go to a location. And then, after we were married for a year, it came time to really make good on that ideal. And my husband is Israeli and spoke very little English when we got married.
Oh. Did
And
you speak Hebrew?
I did not speak Hebrew fluently.
Okay.
So
What was
Yiddish
that like?
was our shared
Yiddish
language.
was your common. Okay.
Yeah. And
Amazing.
but it's not just that he didn't speak a lot of English. He had very little interface with American
Uh,
culture,
Correct.
um,
Yeah.
with Western zeitgeist. He had
Yeah.
come over from Israel when he was very young, when he was 15, but he had immersed himself in yeshiva life. Not exactly the conventional precursor for doing shlichus in America.
Yeah.
And actually, we wrote a letter to the Rebbe saying that we had offers to do shlichus in Israel, we had offers to do shlichus in America, and we were asking the Rebbe in which direction we should go. And I remember Rabbi Klein of blessed memory, one of the Rebbe's secretaries, saying to my husband, "The Rebbe doesn't answer these questions these days. There
Mm.
was a time when the Rebbe would send people specifically. Now you have to do the research, you have to find a place and ask the Rebbe for a bracha." And my husband said, "Look, I'm asking you to put this letter on the Rebbe's desk, and if he doesn't want to answer, he won't answer."
Right. Just
And
give it a try.
a very short time, maybe 2 hours or so,
Oh, wow.
we got an answer. The Rebbe told us to stay in America, which was hugely shocking
Yeah.
to us and to anybody who knew us. And it was at that moment that I started speaking only English to my husband, stopped speaking Yiddish.
You're like, you better learn this language.
Yeah. And since we had gotten married, my uncle, Rabbi Nassim Garavi, had been talking to us about going to Binghamton. But I hadn't
Okay.
really taken him seriously.
Right. Because you're like, we're not going to end up
But
here.
anybody that knows him knows that he doesn't take no for an answer, and he just kept hawking again and again. He needs to bring a couple to Binghamton. At that point, he had already settled a couple in Rochester, in Syracuse, in Ithaca, and the
Mhm.
last city on his list where he felt a responsibility to bring a couple and start a Chabad center was in Binghamton. And at a certain point, he said to us, "You know what? Why don't you just come to Buffalo and you'll just shadow me? You'll watch what I do. And then after a few days, we'll go to Binghamton and you'll see." Anyway, that's what we did. And we came to Binghamton, and there was really a tremendous response. The university at that time was 50% Jewish.
Incredible.
Yeah, and there was no Jewish infrastructure. There
Wow.
was a Jewish student union. It was run by students, but there was no professional staff.
Yeah.
There was no adult leadership. And it was really hard for us to turn our backs on this. And I have to credit my uncle with telling us that, don't worry about not being conversant with American culture and not having a college degree yourself and so on and so forth. That's not why you're coming, and that's not what you have to offer. And you just offer your truth, and the Rebbe will work through you, and it will be fine. And he was very, very insistent.
Convincing.
And yeah, and here we is.
So I hear a campus that's 50% Jewish. And on the one hand, that sounds incredible
Isn't
and
anymore,
amazing.
by the way, because it's
No,
grown, and now it's about 35% Jewish.
which is still a ton. And to me, I almost feel this like overwhelm. Like I almost feel like it's a little bit safer or less overwhelming when you're like, okay, there's 500 Jewish students that I'm responsible to take care of. When you hear that there's 50% of the campus who are Jewish students, how are you, two young schnooks, able to take that responsibility on? And that's a ton of people.
I think the operative word is schnook.
Like you don't think about these things. You just do them.
And you're so stupid.
I agree, because that's kind of how we ended up here.
And I think that's true for all shluchim.
Exactly. You can't think it through too much.
The Rebbe threw us into the deep end and said, swim. And we each try to do our best in our respective places, in our respective corner of the world. I think at the beginning, it's like with every beginning, you're just trying to find your elbows and your knees.
Yeah. What's the demographic? Like, there's from students and not religious students, right?
Are you asking about then or now?
First, I'm going to ask about then. What was it like then?
About then, there were very, very few traditional students. Well, let me put it this way. There were very few observant students, okay?
Okay.
Being on the Eastern Seaboard, there was a lot of tradition.
You high holidays. Exactly.
The conservative movement was in its heyday.
Right.
So there was a lot of tradition. Observant students, very, very few.
Okay.
Very, very few.
It didn't start off that way.
But as we developed the infrastructure and made it a place that was more and more welcoming for observance, we got a larger and larger percentage of observant kids. The implosion of the economy in 2018 brought it up to a whole different level because, people were like, hey, we could be sending our kids to Binghamton for 4 years for what it cost us 1 year at YU or Stern.
Yeah.
And they have a very strong Jewish life there. So they and then are two very, very different things.
Yeah. So now, is it hard to offer both of those needs, or it's easily everyone just kind of finds their place and
it's always hard to be all things to all people.
Right.
It's always a balance, and we definitely feel the imperative to bring more shluchim more widely and more deeply. It's really, really all about having more hours to make deep connections with young people. And big, flashy programs have a very important place.
Mm-hmm.
They create a certain environment. They create Jewish pride and Jewish excitement and vibrancy. What we really need is more people with boots on the ground to connect deeply with people.
Individually.
And so, that is definitely what we're looking at very, very seriously now. We are a team of 4 couples.
You're already 4 couples.
Yeah, but
and you need more.
We need to, I would think that we need to double that, not all at one time, but we need to double that at least.
Wow.
To be able to really feel that we're doing our duty.
Yeah.
Because yes, the Rebbe did give us a mandate and a charge to not just be reacting to the low-hanging fruit, but to be proactively searching.
Yeah.
We do have programming for our observant modern Orthodox cohort. We have programming for those who are much less observant. We offer different classes, different educational opportunities, and so on and so forth. But there's still a lot more work to be done, and we are the first to acknowledge that.
Yeah. So I grew up on Shlichus, but not on campus.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a sister who is actually living on campus, and I'm always in awe. How was it for you to raise your family living on campus and having to adapt to campus life? I feel like the hours are difficult for putting your kids to bed at a decent hour, or just having more structure. And how did you navigate raising a family while being on campus? Was it hard, or you just kind of let it play out?
If I sat here and told you that I had a plan or a navigation out, I would be totally lying and reconstructing history.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly. This was just what we did. This is just what we had to do. This is just what our life was like.
Yeah. Did it ever, I mean, I guess it's a silly question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Like, did you ever feel at any time like exasperated, or like, I can't do this, or this is too hard, or I'm one person, like how am I expected to raise my family and run a huge campus and do all the things that you're doing? Was there ever moments where you're just like, I maxed out?
I mean, I'm sure there were times where I felt overwhelmed, but I never felt like I'm maxed out or this is unfair or I'm exasperated. I usually felt like if I'll sleep a few hours, I'll probably wake up and I'll have
in a better
I'll
place.
have an attitude adjustment. Maybe I
Yeah.
can eat, maybe I'm hungry.
Yeah.
Of
I can
course,
relate
there
to
are
that.
times where you are faced with something very big that takes up a lot of space and you feel like, how am I ever going to be able to, deal with everything else? But I always felt that I had a leg up in this department because I watched my mother navigate a very large family, Baruch Hashem, with an enormous amount of responsibilities. She worked and she also had enormous responsibility in the community. So I just thought that, that's just what you do. You just go from one thing to
How it
another.
is.
You just make lists and you just cross off the things and you go to the next thing. And I'm also very fortunate that I always felt energized by our work.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't think of a better way to spend your life. I just feel like the luckiest girl in the world. So is it sometimes hard? Yeah, it's sometimes hard. I mean, okay, so you don't die from hard work and nobody promised you a rose garden and that's it. You just do as much as you can do and you do what you can do.
Yeah. Do you think there's a difference and a shift in how 20, 30 years ago couples went on Shlichus, or 40 years ago, with less of a sense of ego and the need for self-care, for the lack of better word, and boundaries? And I feel like now it looks very different. Do you see that?
I don't know about ego. I can't speak to ego. I think there's plenty of ego to go around.
Yeah.
In every era, in every time, in every locale.
That's true.
I'm going
100%.
to take ego out.
Take that out. Bad use of word.
Self-care was not a thing. I don't remember ever hearing that term until much more recently.
Right. But did you do anything that would look like self-care, or that not only was it not a term, but it wasn't actually done?
I'm sure people were doing their nails if that's what they wanted to do. And people were.
No, yeah. But besides for nails, like.
I'm just saying, I think people have a tendency to gravitate towards, and maybe if they don't articulate as self-care. Okay.
Right.
But when I think back, there were certain things I enjoyed doing that somehow miraculously I
filled your
found
cup.
time to do.
Yeah.
So whether it was reading or learning, those are the things I enjoyed and did. So I think most people living under normal circumstances will somehow gravitate to that.
Find something.
But it could be that because we were closer to the generation who did not live under normal circumstances. And they just needed to remain alive. They just needed to remain alive. So perhaps that also filtered into our zeitgeist and into the way we saw life. Our parents, they wanted us to have everything they didn't have. I mean, my mother's was born in Brooklyn, so I'm a second generation Brooklynite from that side. But my father was born in the Ukraine as bombs were falling on the hospital, literally. So his experience was of a refugee. His parents were not sure that he would ever live. They didn't. Then when they thought he would never walk because they didn't have enough nutrition, and he had spindles where there should have been.
It's such a different world. It's like even hard to imagine.
Worlds.
Yeah.
I don't remember my parents' vacation wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
Literally, I don't remember vacation being a thing when we were growing up. I grew up in Crown Heights where the big deal was that there was one dairy restaurant, and we went there once a year, and that was the night of Badikas Chametz. When
I was going to say before Pesach, for sure.
The whole house was clean.
Yeah.
Clean for Pesach. That was the one time we went. I remember when the first pizza shop opened on Kingston Avenue. Until then, the only place we could get pizza that we could eat or soft serve ice cream was in Williamsburg, which we did on Sunday afternoons because we went to the Williamsburg Y and we did our activities there. And then we went to get our pizza and ice cream. And then we went on the bus back to Crown Heights. Yeah. So it was a different. So again, if you ask me, I had a magical childhood, but
like vacation wasn't a thing.
Like vacation, it didn't include eating out. It didn't include a lot of the trappings that people consider necessities for their children today.
Yeah.
My father would go to Harvey's toy store for anybody who's listening who remembers Crown Heights of yesteryear, and buy us paper dolls, cutouts, and we play with that for hours and hours and hours. We were just me and my three sisters, because my younger sisters had not yet been born in those days. That's all you needed. You bought a kid a book of cutout paper dolls for like 96 cents, and they played.
It is such a different time. And sometimes I wonder, like, it's a natural shift because the world shifts and we aren't fighting for our physical lives, at least in America right now. And so it's appropriate that we shift with the times and we have different needs, and maybe our mission for this generation is a little bit different. And sometimes I wonder, like, are we losing something? Have we shifted too much to the other way? It's hard to know because I don't know.
I think as long as we keep our eye on the ball, as long as we keep ourselves anchored in mission and purpose, which for Lubavitcher Hasidim means as long as we keep learning the Rebbe's Torah and seeing life through his lens, everything will kind of be included in that. I feel like I'm not trying to oversimplify life. I think that there are challenges and there are things we have to be attentive to. I don't think that we have to go back to another time. I don't think that we have to be living circa 1960s and 70s.
Right.
But I think that there are certain lessons we can take from that time.
Right.
It was a more simple life, and for the most part, I think we were happy.
Yeah.
We were satisfied.
It's like the more complicated and the more access we have to the luxuries and to stuff, like life gets more complicated.
Yeah, we set our children up with a lot of expectations, and then when you can't meet those expectations, or life throws you a curveball, you're less able to catch that adroitly, and it feels like a sucker punch, as opposed to life is hard, and sometimes things
just be grateful you're alive.
So,
what is your reaction to the word martyr? I have a very complicated relationship with that word because on the one hand, a lot of people that I love in my life seemed to have a more martyr-like tendency. And I think sometimes inherently Shlichus asks of you to feel that way or to act that way.
How are you defining the word?
Like to do your job at all costs. Right? Like at all costs, you are going to do your job, whether it's to your mental health, whether it's to your family's mental health, whether it's for physical health, like at all costs, you are going to do your job.
To me, martyr has the connotation of giving something up for something else.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if Shlichus defines who you are, it's not a facet of your being. So your children, your family, your relationship with your spouse is all part of your Shlichus.
So you don't sacrifice it.
So you can't. You have to always be balancing all the parts. There's this, to me, it's one of the most beautiful stories. And I know that's a very strong statement because there's hundreds of thousands of stories concerning our Rebbe. But there's this one story that just has spoken to me deeply always. Herbert Wiener, who was a Reform rabbi and dabbled in academic study of mysticism, wrote a book called 9.5 Mystics, in which he relates that he went to speak to different mystics. And one of the people he spoke to was our Rebbe. And he had, I believe, 2 very long personal audiences. And during the second one, he worked up the moxie, the chutzpah, and he asked the Rebbe why it is that he sees such a simplicity in the eyes of his adherents, of his Hasidim, and that they ask him all kinds of things. They seek his counsel. And the Rebbe said to him, what you see in the eyes of my Hasidim, of my adherents, is not simplicity. It's the lack of a kera. And he said, what? And the Rebbe said, a kera, a fissure, a chasm. What you see is a lack of conflict and tension. And that, I think, is one of the great privileges of Hasidus, and specifically the Hasidus of our Rebbe, illuminating for us how everything is part of one whole. And so from that respect, yes, Shlichus sometimes demands that you work much, much harder than other people on your block and put in your all on a constant and consistent basis and do a lot of things you don't enjoy doing and do them when it's least convenient.
Convenient.
Yes, there's a lot of that, but it's not a martyrdom. It comes from understanding that this is who I am and what I am and why I am, and I'm all in.
I 100% agree with you. Do you think that there are people who don't understand that?
Probably.
That they don't understand that your marriage and your children and your home life and your physical health are all part of the same whole. So those things end up getting sacrificed because it's not being looked at that way.
Yes, but I think we're now at a particular junction in the continuum of Shlichus. And I think that just like my generation, my classmates, most were children of refugees. Okay? Certainly my mother's generation, all children of refugees, right? So what defined their life was the need to remain alive, both physically and spiritually.
Spiritually. Yeah.
Right? I think that what defined Shlichus for many decades was the need to plant the flag, was the need to establish the fact that the Rebbe was going to have, in effect, embassies where any Jew could run for anything at all and be safe in every corner of this world.
It's really true.
There was a lot of pushback. There was an enormous amount of derision and disdain, and I could use a lot of other synonyms. So I think that there probably was a generation or two of shluchim who brought that same mesiras nefesh, that same self-sacrifice that their parents had exhibited to remain Jewish, to remain observant. In Russia, they brought it to their work in America or in Europe, in Asia, in North Africa.
And maybe it was necessary at that point.
Yes. We can sit back and we can...
As if everything that we're experiencing is because of the work that our parents and our grandparents did. Yeah, we can't, it's not, we get to live like this because of the sacrifices that they made.
It's a little bit like women today who can go through medical school and make the decision that they don't want to practice medicine. They want to be home with their children. They can only do that because women a few generations ago fought to be
broke that mold
into medical school.
Yeah.
And fought to practice medicine.
I think it's very important because I think, speaking from my generation, I think as a millennial, like we're kind of at the cusp, like we kind of bridge two different generations. But I think it's very easy to forget. I mean, it's easy to judge like how they did things previously and look down on it. And then we have it all figured out. But it's so important to remember that we only get to even have these choices and we only get to be privileged in this way because of what our parents 100%. And our grandparents did.
One thing is for sure, we're not smarter than they were.
Definitely not.
And so it's not like they didn't understand about work-life balance, but all of a sudden...
It just wasn't an option.
We're enlightened. You know what I'm saying? It's not that. They were smarter than us, at least as smart as us, but they were living in a different reality. And they had to create.
And I think it's a very powerful narrative shift to be like, instead of, well, this is how they did it then, and we're so, enlightened now, it's almost like this narrative shift of this appreciation and this gratefulness that we get to have choices and we aren't fighting for our survival.
Right.
Not spiritually, I guess you can say spiritually because it is it's a rough out there.
We are also at a point in the Rebbe's program where we know that if something's going on in our life and we have to step away from the 24/7 work that is Shlichus, to attend to some great rupture in our life, whether physical or emotional or spiritual, whatever it is, the work will continue. We will be able to put
come back.
We will be able to put certain things into place for that amount of time. We will, as Hashem, come back. But we can only do that individually in our own small corners of the world because the network is so strong. That network did not exist. Chabad Lubavitch did not have the name recognition.
True.
And I'm not even talking about 60, 70 years ago. I'm talking about 40 and 35 and even 30 years ago. The shift from after Gimel Tammuz to before is really hard to conjure.
Yeah.
And it's impossible to explain cognitively. It is literally, those words that we used to sing from Tehillim, Hayel Yeshua's B'Keref Haaretz. Literally, we see the Rebbe, just turning over this world from his perch on high.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think whatever we just discussed is we're discussing in the context of Shlichus, but I think it's globally. The generation that we live in, whatever world you're living in, you have the privilege to live your life a certain way because of the work and the seeds that our forefathers literally
and foremothers
have planted. And I think about that a lot because sometimes you're in the daily the struggle and the different aspects of life that pulls you and sometimes I'm like, I feel like, oh my gosh, I hit the wall. I can't do this. And like, am I weak? Am I just not made out of the same stuff?
Don't you think that people of a different generation had all of those same emotions? They just didn't talk about it. Either because they didn't have the time.
Yeah. You didn't have that luxury.
They didn't have the time. They didn't have the luxury. They didn't have the luxury of leaning into any type of insecurity, any type of doubt, self or otherwise. And because things are, thank God, overall so much easier today in certain ways, there's more of that ability.
They have too much time to think sometimes.
I remember one of my classmates turned 40 and she made a big party. And I remember I came and I remember her mother shaking her head saying, she doesn't understand. This is a ganze party because you turned 40, Baruch Hashem. Meaning like, not being so involved with yourself. And, just thank Hashem, you turned 40.
Move on.
More long, happy, healthy years to do his work and move on. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I want to, it's so important to think about these things every once in a while. And I think not to think about those past generations and lives to somehow feel insignificant or negative, but in the perspective of gratitude and understanding of how lucky we are that we have the opportunity to take more time, to be more in tune, to care about our feelings. But then also I do think that we are trending a little to seeing that too much of that also can be detrimental. And
yes, paralysis by analysis.
Yeah. Like we always need to come back to some kind of balance and middle ground, like spending too much time thinking about how you feel and what you want, all that stuff can also be a little bit of a
debilitating
obstacle. Yeah. So as you're building this beautiful community in Binghamton and you're on Shlichus, you're also in your own right learning and studying and writing books. And I want to know about that. I think you've written 3 books.
Well, I've edited
or more.
2 and co-written 1.
Okay. So this is a big deal. And how did you do that? Was this like your fill your bucket type activity that you did on the side? Or did it feel like this was part of your mission, part of your shlichus, part of what you are meant to be doing in this world? I'm assuming it has to be.
So in giving thought to the fact that I was going to be talking to you today and being attentive to the fact that it's called Totally Unexpected, I was trying to think of what happened in my
Yeah.
life that was totally unexpected.
I love that. I love that you thought about that.
I couldn't think at first of something in particular like that I could
Yeah.
point to,
Like this big
but
event.
really everything was totally unexpected.
Unexpected.
I had
Yeah.
no idea what our Shlichus was going to look like. The Rivkah Slonim that left Crown Heights to come to Binghamton,
I had no
no
idea.
clue,
Yeah.
no clue what it was going to look like. And also, even as we were doing the work, I don't think we ever thought about it like, look what we're building, or look what it was just like, get
Mhm.
up and do what
Mhm.
you have to do.
Mhm.
And I think that the things you now mentioned about my interest in mikvah, my interest in women's life and lore in Judaism, and more recently, my project having to do with intimacy,
The holy
um,
intimacy.
holy
Yes.
intimacy, I feel like they're all things that found me. I didn't go
Yeah, I wanna hear about like how
I
like
didn't
tell me
go
about that.
looking. They just
Yeah.
well, I think total immersion was an outgrowth of the fact that, after some time, it was an outgrowth of the fact that, I don't know, maybe we were here 1 year and my husband was going to the annual convention for shluchim, for the male emissaries of the Rebbe, and I think I just, like, made a cost-benefit analysis and decided that it made more sense for me to stay in Binghamton. And I figured I would just hunker down for the weekend and take care of my baby and read. And I
Mm.
said to myself, "No, that's crazy. I'm gonna be here for Shabbos. No, I can't just, like, eat, sleep, and read. That no." So I started to think, well, what could I do that would be interesting, that would be different? And I decided that I was gonna do a Friday night dinner and a talk, and I figured every college kid has to be interested in love and sex, so I'm gonna do a
Yes.
talk on love, sex, and marriage. And I did that, and I read as much as I could in to prepare myself and researched, and this is before the World Wide Web, of course.
Right.
Um,
Did you at all feel like unequipped for these topics?
yes, yes, but I also felt like, who else is gonna do this?
Who's that's gonna do it? Yeah, this is
And I
exactly.
also found that we have a lot more inside of us than we realize.
Mhm.
That when you start doing the work, you realize that there's like you may not know the exact citation, but you know you have
Yeah.
muscle memory. You've learned things, you've heard things, and they bubble up from your subconscious. And yes, my library was tiny, but whatever I had at my disposal, I
Disposal.
used. Put together a presentation, which thank God was met with enthusiasm. And to this day, once a year, I do a talk. You know, it's evolved. People are not ready to listen to a 3-hour lecture, even if it is punctuated with food. Uh,
Right.
so now it takes a different form, and more recently, I've called it bath, bed, and beyond. But
I like that.
the point is, I think somebody heard about this and asked me to come talk to the women in her community. I was very, very anxious about that because it was one thing to
Yeah.
talk to like a small group of my
Your
students,
people. Yeah.
and then it kind of took off. I started talking in more and more places about mikvah, and there were very few people speaking publicly at the time on this subject.
And was it mostly like the spiritual aspects of mikvah or the practical side? Like what were you addressing?
Mostly the philosophical, the theological
Okay.
construct. It wasn't the details. It was just
Yeah.
kind of introducing this concept and its importance in Jewish life.
Yeah.
And then I realized that people really needed to hear honest voices, that the only thing that was available in written form were books with the actual detailed laws,
Yeah.
all of which were written by men, by the way, though in those days. This
Yeah.
was before the books we have today written by women. But there was nothing about what was the lived experience of doing this mitzvah. And I did not and do not fancy myself a writer, but I have always been a reader. And I decided that, I was going to try to gather existing writings and commission writings on the subject. I was very, very fortunate to have the assistance of a very dear friend and my writing teacher, Dr. Liz Rosenberg, who taught and still teaches at Binghamton. And so she helped me with that project. She also helped me with my next project called Bread and Fire, Jewish Women Find God in the Everyday. And that was really, again, I was catapulted into it by seeing a need, which was, again, I felt that there were no honest, vibrant, eclectic writings about the lived experience of being an observant woman.
Yeah.
There was plenty to be said about what observant women couldn't do. And all of it really centered around the synagogue, which is not the central arena of Judaism. And I wanted to kind of shine light on
Emphasize
that.
that. Yeah.
So that was that.
And is this coming about through,
Talks
your
on the
interactions with students and what
reaction. Yes, yes. And then I started also lecturing publicly.
lecturing and then seeing the need of what is missing.
Right, right.
And then holy intimacy, which is only what, like 4 years old?
Yeah. So that really was again, outgrowth of seeing a need. I was speaking with my very good friend and dear cousin and co-author eventually of Holy Intimacy. And I realized, and she realized, that I was fielding the same questions about sex as she was. And we're living in two different places. I'm, my cohort are young students on a secular campus. She's a teacher in Beis Rivkah High
The
School
religious community, yeah.
in the religious community, the Hasidic community. And that if we don't put answers out there, then people are, yes, they're going to go to the web where there's a lot of good information and there's also a lot of dubious information.
Yeah. It's interesting because Sarah Morozov was my teacher, my Kala teacher, or the teacher that we go to before we get married to prepare ourselves for an intimate relationship, which in the religious world we don't experience before marriage. And she was a great teacher, but we didn't discuss the questions that come up today, which are myriads of position and pleasure and what's okay and what's not okay, nighttime, morning, shower, all these things. Like those things weren't discussed. I got married 20 years ago. My anniversary is in like 2 weeks or
Mazel
whatever.
tov. Many more.
Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful.
It feels like a huge milestone.
Years.
I mean, so obviously she's seeing that how she was doing it until now is not satiating the questions that people are asking. I didn't get to read the whole book. I only got to read a little bit a while ago. But are we actually addressing the questions that are coming to you, like the practical questions that in my day we weren't talking about?
Yeah. The book is kind of like a zigzag between very deep Hasidic concepts and very practical, visceral, detailed, organic questions.
Yeah.
Beauty of Hasidus, that you can take these deep concepts and they can speak equally to people steeped in those concepts from a very young age and people who have had no interface with them previously. But the depth and the profundity and the truth speaks to everyone equally.
Yeah. I don't know if I heard this from you personally or I read this or saw this, but you said that the feedback that you got from this book was really profound and you had people coming to you and sharing that this is a book that they wish they had, people in their 70s. So my question is, it's not that times have changed and all of a sudden we need this information. If people in their 70s are coming to you and saying, I wish I had this information, it was an issue then too.
I think that people being people, human nature being human nature, you're always going to have people who are curious. You're always going to have people who have greater resilience, greater ability to pivot, greater ability to just go with the flow. And you're going to have people who have questions or difficulties or
things aren't as smooth,
etc. And so for every person who said, I wish I would have had this when I was 70, there are probably 5 people who are like, hey, I did just fine.
I did just fine without this.
Life was great.
I guess that's true. Yeah.
And things were fine. And so was there struggle? Was there pain surrounding this? Was there a lack of information? Was there a lack of clarity? I am sure that there were people who felt that they suffered from that. But it wasn't a time where people were talking about this openly. and they just had to do the best they could. And they feel like had they had this resource then, that would have smoothed things out for them. But again, I'm very cognizant of the fact that, millions of people did just
We're fine. And was there negative? Was there pushback on like, how could you be talking about these things? How could you be making a book about sexual pleasure for women?
So the book is not about sexual pleasure for women. The book is about
Right, but it includes.
But yes, it certainly does speak about the importance of sexual pleasure and the imperative for a man to provide that to his wife and so on and so forth. There was a lot of skepticism before.
Yeah.
There was a lot of reticence. There was a lot of kind of warning, like, don't say I didn't warn you.
Or like right? This is where I feel like the slippery slope little conversation maybe can come in.
About the slippery slope. I don't remember actually anybody talking about that, but more like, these are not things we talk about publicly. There's a reason no one ever did this before.
Right.
And I remember consulting with a Rav about one particular aspect and showing him what we had written and asking him if he felt that it was correct. And he said, it's correct, but I can't promise you that you won't face enormous pushback for putting this in your book. And there were all these things like you're going to face a cherem and, but I remember when I first started identifying as a Hasidic feminist, I remember people saying, none of your children will get shidduchim. It's going to be really hard for you to find matches for your children if you identify as a feminist and so on and so forth. So, but I came to a point where both of us felt like we couldn't not do this. This was too important. And somewhat, we're very, very thankful to Hashem that there's been, as far as we know,
it's been huge.
No negative, like anybody.
Once it came out and once people cooled down and actually read it and understood the power.
It's been translated in Hebrew and in Portuguese and in French.
Oh, wow.
And God willing,
that's huge.
We'll be out in a few more languages soon.
It's really incredible. So identifying as a Hasidic feminist, how did that come about?
I don't even remember. I think somebody asked me, maybe it was somebody asked me, maybe it was I think it might be from an interview with the original publisher of Total Immersion. So this is going back 30-something years ago. So Jason Aronson, who's now defunct, but was the publisher then, they put out this monthly booklet journal about their new offerings. And there was an interview with me about Total Immersion. And maybe it was there that
just came
out. The interviewer asked me I don't remember exactly what the question was, but something about feminism. And I think I said something like, well, I consider myself a Hasidic feminist. Feminism means many different things to different people. But if you're going to define feminism as a celebration of womanhood and the feminine contribution, well, yeah, I'm all about that. Hasidic feminist, I still don't see that those two words are oxymoronic. It was funny because from my community of origin, it was like, oh my God, you're branding yourself and bad things are going to happen. And from the feminist community, it was like, how do you call yourself a feminist?
Yeah, exactly.
You have no right to use that holy term. So it was kind of a place to be.
Yeah, it was like not fitting into any really. Well, it's interesting. There's different waves of feminism, right? Yeah. The original feminism was like, we just want to be able to vote. We want to be able to go to college. And then the second wave of feminism was more like, we want to be equal in the sense of we want to do everything the man's doing.
There were probably more than a few waves, even though you're right, historically referred to as such. But, something that I think is just fascinating and important is that the Seneca Conference, which was the first convention or convening for feminists, actually took place the same year that the Baal Shem Tov revealed himself as a leader.
No way. Did not know that.
I've always seen feminism as a natural precursor to the coming of Mashiach. Baal Shem Tov was all about making accessible the well springs of Hasidus, which are the precursor to the coming of Mashiach. And long ago, the prophet Jeremiah said that the feminine energy will reign supreme in the Messianic era. And so I don't see feminism as anything but a reflection of this truth and our inexorable move towards that time.
It's incredible to actually see the trajectory of the world and watch it evolve to where we need to get to eventually have Mashiach.
Yeah, I think what the Rebbe crystallized was that feminism is not the mimicking of the masculine. And that actually was a repudiation of femininity. It was actually an insult. It was actually undercutting your worth as a woman if your only metric is what a man does or what a man can do. And the Rebbe, wrote that and taught that over and over in a time where I think very few people were willing or able to even hear it. Now I think people understand. Because like you said, there's always the pendulum. It swings and then it has to go back to the center. And I think
where do you think we are today in the feminism journey? Like, what do we have right? And what do we still need to understand and work on?
It's interesting because what we have right is that we're closer, although we haven't arrived at a place where women get paid the same amount as men do for doing the same job. Obviously, what's right is that women can own property and vote and so on and so forth, right?
Even though in the taharat, that's not necessarily true.
Not in the same way.
Going back to what we were talking about in the beginning.
But if you understand it, although as moderns we chafe against it, but it's really part of a larger framework in which women are being protected. And that's a whole other subject about when protection can become debilitating. But from the perspective of like why women don't automatically inherit, right? So you could look at that and be like, that's just plain misogynist, it's phallocentric, it's just horrible. Or if you understand that children can only inherit when there are assets. But what happens when there are no assets? Then the older brothers are responsible for making money for their mother and their sisters.
Right.
So it's a double-edged sword, but it's part of a larger system that is predicated on obligation versus rights.
Yeah.
But bringing it back to being able to
modern
times, being able to operate. And I think that's one of the things that's really hard for people to understand, that a woman could be a neurosurgeon. She could be anything she wants to be, and yet she can't have an aliyah, or she can't do this, or she can't do that. And again and again, we have to take ourselves back to remembering it's not about rights, it's not about access, it's about obligation to a larger framework. But from the secular perspective, from the civil perspective, that we have right, although there are still large pockets of misogyny, and it's really astounding. And I don't find that there's less misogyny in the secular world than there is in the observant world.
100%. Sometimes it's even the opposite.
It's startling. It's really, really startling to see after all these years how much work there's still to do. But yes, we've made a lot of inroads, but there's still too much of this fallacious idea that what men do has worth and what women do doesn't.
Right. Where does that construct even come from? That what men do hold higher value, and we're trying to constantly be equal to them.
We've lived in a masculine world for thousands of years, and spiritually too. The world is a more masculine place. The 6 days of the week are marked by efforts and overtures and extending oneself and protruding and putting oneself out there. And Shabbos, which parallels the Messianic era, is about being in a state of receipt and receptivity, and being as opposed to doing. And there are so many other ways of saying the same thing. So there's a good reason why the masculine energy has been celebrated, why it has taken prominence, why it has been front and center. And now the work is about not getting confused about what this era is about. Because what the
Yeah.
world does not need is double masculine energy.
And it doesn't need double feminine energy either,
Right.
does it?
Right.
You don't want,
Correct. What
which
it
is,
needs
yeah.
is for the feminine voice to rise and
Yeah.
be heard and assert itself. But every time a student tells me, yeah, I became bat mitzvah when I was 13, I want to tear my hair out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, do you realize?
You just gave up on your power.
Do you like? And they think it's like they're telling me what a feminist they are because they had their bat mitzvah at 13. And meanwhile, the reason in Jewish law for why a woman becomes a woman in Jewish law, bat mitzvah 12, is because women are understood to have a different level of wisdom, discernment, maturity, whatever word you want to use.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But there's no appreciation or not enough. Let me say there's not enough of an appreciation. There's not enough of an appreciation of what it means that Judaism says you're Jewish if your mother is Jewish. Like, could you imagine a world where Judaism said you're Jewish if your father was Jewish? Now that would be roundly condemned as phallocentric. You know, right? And yet the fact that if your mother is Jewish is what makes you Jewish is not, I don't think, celebrated nearly enough.
It's not,
for
given
potency
the credit for what it is.
Of that statement, right?
Yeah.
So it's that confusion still that persists.
Yeah.
That makes people think that if men do it, it's important.
I want to go back to what you said about we don't need the double masculine energy. I love that. And I think it's so true. So what does that mean practically for us women who maybe because we live in a masculine world, which we're slowly shifting, what's the message? Like, what does that mean? How do we step into our power and be real, true feminist and not be part of the problem where we don't need double masculine energy? What does that look like?
Well, in his iconic Sicha on Vatitzi Dina Bas Leah, and Dina, the daughter of Leah, went out, the Rebbe at the end of that Sicha, which is groundbreaking and amazing on so many levels in so many ways, but for now I'll just focus on the end, where the Rebbe says that women were given very special abilities to impact others, and that they must leave their homes and shed their light and teach their teachings and so on and so forth, but to do so in a feminine way. So it sounds like a tongue twister, sounds like a riddle, but what the Rebbe is saying is that, well, what I understand, I don't want to say what the Rebbe is saying. What I understand is that we are all composites of both male and female aspects.
Right. Of course,
Every
we have
person
both.
is. And in some people, in some women, the male aspects are going to show up in a way that it doesn't even show up in some men.
Yeah.
Okay. That's okay. However, you are a woman. So you're going to take that predisposition or that strength or that calling that you have to do something that maybe is seen as more iconically or more typically masculine, but you're still going to do it as a woman because you're a woman.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what God needs of you. It's not that you have to suppress the more public aspects of your persona, but they are going to be expressed or funneled through the feminine aspects of who you are.
And I think that takes a little bit of true reflection and understanding of what your feminine is. I think sometimes it's so easy to just override it or not even know what that is for you.
Or conflate it with some of the very external trappings of femininity.
Right.
And that's where I think like Shlichus, going back to Shlichus, it's such an interesting venture because I think for many, many Shluchim couples, it really democratizes life. It really creates a very egalitarian life where
so true.
A lot of men are, drawing baths for the kids and making dinner and what have you.
100%.
Because their wives are
doing the grocery shopping.
Yeah, their wives are doing things that have to be done.
My husband does all the grocery shopping.
I grew up seeing that. And my father's an enormous, enormous Talmid Chacham. he, as a young child, was identified as an Eloi, as a genius, and a big chassid, and does a tremendous amount of learning and davening. But growing up, he was very, very hands-on with us children, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that he understood that he needed to support what my mother needed to do,
Yeah.
in whatever form that took, and that really stayed with me. That was an enormous
I had that experience
statement.
too.
And my husband really did the same thing for me when our children were young, allowing me to travel and be engaged in things that I was. It wasn't about her right, his right. It was about
Hmm.
we're both in something larger than ourselves. We're going to have to do whatever it takes. This is going to look like whatever it looks like, depending on what is called for at that moment.
I really love that. And to wrap up and ask my last question, kind of full circle and back to the book, Holy Intimacy and Relationships, what do you see, especially in our modern times, as an important to lean into our feminine role in a relationship, not just like the chores of a relationship, because that looks different for everybody. And every relationship looks different, but even in our intimate relationship, what's the role of the feminine?
Before I answer that question specifically, and I'm not trying to wiggle out of it, so if I
Of
don't
course.
come back to it naturally and organically, remind
Yeah,
me.
yeah, yeah.
But before you said that last part of your question, I thought you were
Mm,
going maybe in a different direction. But it occurs to me that we could wrap all the disparate threads of our conversation together
mm,
in understanding one paradigm, which is people will say, well, Judaism is patriarchal. And I would have
yeah,
to agree.
yeah,
And I could also say Judaism is matriarchal, and it is in
yeah,
in an enormous amount of ways. It's not just that
yeah.
your Jewish identity is all about what your mother is, but it's about how Jewish women throughout the annals of Jewish history were always the ones who
At the
they
forefront.
were at the forefront.
Yeah.
They stayed the course. They pushed back when their husbands lost their way, and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
But at its core, Judaism is covenantal. And that's the big
Mm.
paradigm shift. It's not about me. It's not about you. It's about us locked in this relationship with Hashem.
I really, really appreciate hearing that.
And I think that that's true. It shows up in so many ways in Judaism and in Hasidus and as shluchim and shluchais and as leaders of our community. We're in a covenant. The Rebbe sent us as his messengers. He sent us into this great privilege of being his hands and feet locally, wherever we find ourselves. And that is a holy covenant. And it's really not about me, and it's not really about my husband. It's about us being conduits for something much larger than ourselves. And together, we're going to do what it takes.
That's beautiful.
So in a marriage, you really have the same paradigm. You have a paradigm that's centrifugal. It's fueled by God. God is the senior partner in your marriage. And that really is going to inform almost everything else. Now, we're not all these, I certainly am not this paragon of piety and faith, and I'm not this holy person, and it's not like I don't have desires and selfishness and all that other stuff.
All the human conditions that we have.
All the human pathologies on steroids. But if you continue throughout your life to learn these ideas over and over and over, they have to filter down to some level.
Right.
And even when you
They're
don't,
not just
and
thoughts.
even if you don't learn, but if you understand you're part of a larger system, which takes us back to those aspects of Jewish law, which certainly will rankle our modern sensibilities.
Mhm.
But if we step back and we see how we're part of something so much larger, and that this is God's wisdom, that after everything is said and done, the Creator is calling the shots, and only her instruction will lead to really the most fulfilled life. It's a very different point of departure, and it's a lot less about posturing and resenting if you can't do this, you can't do that, or this happened or that happened, and much more focus on what is my purpose, what is my mission. So now to get to the last question you asked, which is a very probably bad way to end a conversation because it opens up a whole new Pandora's
Whole
box.
new topic. We should have talked about this way earlier.
But in Chassidus, in Kabbalah, and in life, there are these two polarities, the mashpia and the makabel, the initiator, the receiver. But the more you learn, the more you understand that it's in a feedback loop. And in many, many profound ways, the receiver is actually what jumpstarts the initiator. And that without the receiver, there cannot be any initiation. And
So true.
Your question is very much on the mark, is very, very important. I think there are a lot of social malaise that stem from this disequilibrium between men and women. I think couples where the man is making a lot less than his wife might especially suffer. And it is a real thing that women have to guard against, not emasculating their husbands. And because not only is that not healthy for your husband, it's not going to be good for you.
Right.
It's really not good for anybody, which takes us back to the previous conversation about how Judaism, there's a place for men, there's a place for women, and that actually works out better for both that way.
So I know we have to wrap up, but you're right. It brought up a whole host of other questions, but not emasculating your husband. Let's say you are bringing in more money and your husband struggles with that. What does that look like to not emasculate?
That looks like finding ways in which you respect him. And he knows that with every fiber of his being. For many men, it is about bringing home, the bacon, the bread. Okay, let's put it that way.
And it's just so wired into like.
That goes back to the rupture, from eating from the Eitz Hadas, from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Like the ramifications were going to be difficulty with making a living and difficulty with bringing life into this world.
I love that we have to bring it back to the beginning. We have to understand the origin of this conflict. It is just embedded in us.
Right. And so that hits a very, very deep nerve for many men. However, I have found that where women maintain the balance in their families, where the most important thing about their husband was never about how much money he was going to be able to make.
Right.
That's not why she married him. That's not why she respects him. Then it could work. But in the more Western paradigm, that's difficult to maintain because money is so central.
Right. And it is a manifestation of the masculine. Like I can provide, I can take care of, I can protect.
It's not supposed to be. We're supposed to have moved way beyond that. But
as modern as our world is,
but there's some things that are just
yeah. But I think it is, in the end, a very good way to end on just understanding the dynamics, and what we have in our control is the respect that we build into our relationship. And we have the ability to not make it about money. Maybe the world is stuck on that, but each in our individual lives, we can kind of.
There are also many ways in which a man provides, and the monetary is only one.
One of them.
When you have that balance, then you have what to work with, which again brings us back to living a covenantal life. Realizing we didn't come here to make a living; we came here to make a life. Making a living is tangential.
Way to end off with the best one-liner. I love that.
All tied up. It's all tied up.
Say that again. We didn't come here to make a living. We came here to make a life.
And making a living is tangential to making a life. It's a means towards an end.
You need to make a living, but it's not the end game
not
here.
The end.
Yeah. Well, with that, we will finish.
With that,
with that, we're done. Thank you so much for being here and exploring. Like, I know these topics can be really difficult to explore, but I really appreciate the way in which you honored all my questions and explored with me, especially the feminine aspect of our existence. And it was really beautiful.
was my great pleasure. You're quite a powerhouse, and it was a lot of fun sitting down with you and getting to know a little bit more about you, because I'm an admirer from afar.
Okay, wow, wasn't that incredible? So I just have to reflect for a second on how honored I am that I have the opportunity to talk to really cool people. And this week in specific, Rivkah Slonim. I have to say that it's a little intimidating to to interview such intelligent people that have pioneered and have made such inroads in the community and the culture that we live in. And she was just so lovely and was so gracious and patient with all my questions. And I just have to just take a moment and be really grateful and humbled by that opportunity. I really am fascinated and care a lot about the topic that we spent a lot of time talking about, which was women in Torah and our role as women as in leadership positions. And I'm always asking people for their perspective and their thoughts. And I'm always thinking about it, especially because I am in a leadership position. And it's interesting because in my day-to-day life, I feel very empowered as a woman. I don't feel held back at all. I feel like I get to really express who I am and my talents. I feel that I'm really respected by my husband and my community. And honestly, like the community knows, like the women, we're the one that makes, we're in charge. Let's just say it that way. But even with that, even in my role as a woman and in my day-to-day life where I really, it's hard for me to relate to, sometimes it's hard for me to relate to the feeling of oppression or less than or not having equal opportunity because that's not what I experience in my life day to day. But also, like, there are times where I have questions when I'm learning the Chumash and learning the Torah and seeing how certain things play out. I do wonder, like, where we stand and how come do women are not allowed to, for example, in the times of the Torah, own property, and how come we can't be a witness or or a judge or any of that stuff. And it sometimes that little like indignation rises in me and I'm like, wait, what do you mean? But why? And I also, it's interesting because I don't want to be equal to a man. And I recognize that we all have our unique abilities and qualities that we're supposed to tap into. And the last thing I want to be is like a man. But it's interesting. Like, do I think that women should get equal pay for doing the same job? Like, inherently, I think women are so valuable. And I think the Torah thinks women are so valuable. And I feel like I come to this conclusion that just because we aren't doing the same thing or we have different roles and we are of value. So there's no excuse for women to be treated as less than, maybe different, but not less. I just think that this is a topic that a lot of us probably think about, and there's probably not a lot of answers that answer all the questions perfectly that we all of a sudden all feel good about. And I think through this episode, we have some unanswered questions. Like we have some parts to the Torah where we just kind of need to accept that it is what it is and there is no real answer and we don't really understand and that might make us feel inferior. And I guess it's kind of up to us on how we want to handle that, how each person individually relates to it and handles it. So all to say that this is a topic that I am always very interested in delving into and hearing other people's thoughts and how other people feel and approach it, because it just is good to hear different perspectives and not stay in our own mind about it. So it was really fun for me and meaningful that I got to spend time talking to Rivkah about it because she is very much knowledgeable in this area. So I have to say, not all my questions were answered completely, but so much food for thought and so many things to listen, to learn from, and to ponder. And I hope that's what you experienced as well. And moving on to our voice note section, this week, the voice note prompt was your Pesach tips, tricks, and hacks. I thought it would be really fun because this episode is coming out so close to Pesach for people to share the things that have made their life a little bit easier or something that they discovered, something fun, something to bring good energy to Pesach. Pesach is a time that I think it brings a lot of stress. And I don't know exactly where the stress of Pesach originated from. Like, it's so funny. Like in the Torah, it's like, okay, don't eat leavened bread. And all of a sudden, we're in a tizzy. It's like such an innocent little verse in the Torah. And it like upends our life for a month. So I always find that very, very fascinating. And Pesach has so many deep and important messages and opportunities for transformation. And I think it takes a lot of intention to really set your goals. And that is why I thought that would be fun to hear from some of you on how you've navigated and managed this time of the year. So, without further ado, here's the first voice note.
Hi, Chavie. I love this question about Pesach. So early on in my marriage, I was definitely struggling with Pesach. I thought it was very hard. There was so much work. I felt very limited in what I could make. And I was just struggling. It was hard. And when I had little children, I realized that my attitude about Pesach was not good. And this was the attitude I was going to transmit to my children if I kept that up. So I decided to work on myself and think about practical things that I could do to make it easier. And then also really working on the spiritual part of Pesach and how to make it more interesting and meaningful for myself. So I'm so glad that I did that work when my children were small. Now, 25 years later, Pesach is my favorite holiday. I love it. My children really likes it, and they know that it is my favorite holiday. So some of the things that I did and I have kind of refined over the years is I spend significant amount of time up front, well before Pesach, on the planning, figuring out the menus, who I'm inviting, and then coming up with the shopping lists and menus and all of that, and then also coming up with a schedule of counting backwards of when I'm doing what. I'm very specific, and I could cross things off. And doing that has allowed me to not walk into the Seder completely exhausted. And I think that was part of the issue, was I was so tired by the time we actually sat down at the table. I would also say that coming up with some specific family traditions and recipes that you only make for Pesach, there's a lot of things you can do. Well, I don't know a lot, but there are things you can do to make it really special. And then finally, I want to say, if you can, hire help. If you don't have a Pesach kitchen, which I don't have, I got myself extra shelves that I could wheel around in the kitchen so that I could close things off. Just come up with things that is going to work for you to make it easier. It is really worth it. And my resolution for this year is that I am not going to give up on my own sanity. I am going to make it to the gym, and I am going to make it outside for a walk and some sunshine during that critical time, the few days leading up to Pesach. So wishing everyone a smooth preparation.
Okay, so I really feel like this message is so powerful. And I love that she shared with us her process and was really honest with us, like how difficult Pesach was and how she had a negative energy around it. And she knew that if she didn't want to pass it on to her kids, she better, change her attitude. And it's so easy to say, but so much harder to do. So I really, really, really admire that, like, I'm going to do this and this is how I did it, and really practical ways of how she really transformed this holiday to something that she loathed to something that she now loves. And I think that is really, really admirable. I have to say that over the years, I have experienced similar sentiments that Pesach, I happen to really love Pesach as a holiday unto itself, but the prepping for it and the stress around it, and especially running the community and having so much responsibility on making sure that everybody in your community's Pesach is meaningful and enjoyable, can be a lot of pressure. So I spend so much time in therapy walking through that and talking through it. And I have to say, over the last 10 years, like every year I get a little bit better at remembering what this holiday is all about. I think we can get so lost in the details and in the grind of like getting it done that we forget what this holiday is about. And I remember having this really powerful conversation with my therapist, and he was like, okay, so tell me, I don't know, I'm not Jewish. So tell me, like, what is the point of Pesach? Like, what are you celebrating? And I'm like, well, it's really about freedom and inner freedom and transformation. And as I'm like saying these words out loud, I'm like, wow, like somewhere along the way, I lost the plot. Like it doesn't feel very, very free. And I have to digress and share with you what my grandmother said about Pesach, which is hilarious. And she can get away with that. It's one of my favorite stories about my grandmother. And I think I did share this on the Substack essay that I shared about her. But she would come to the Seder exhausted, and she'd sit down at the Seder and she'd be like, they forgot to free the women. Like, yeah, Pesach's a holiday of freedom, but they forgot to free the women. And also talking about women. It's all serendipitous. But for real, when I remember like what I'm supposed to be doing and what the message is, I think it is really helpful to stay grounded. And one of the tips that my therapist gave me was, when you're doing a task, instead of like your mind like spinning in a million circles, like you're peeling 50 pounds of potatoes. So like be in it, peel the potatoes, feel your feet on the ground, like just notice what you're doing, stay focused on the task at hand. And I know it sounds so silly, but I find it to be really, really helpful. And so within these voice notes, I'm adding my little tips and tricks that I'm reminded of. And yeah, it has helped me over the years to, first of all, remember what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And second of all, staying focused and grounded at the task at hand. And yeah, next voice note.
My notes app is my brain for Pesach. After Pesach, every single year, I make notes of meals that were successful, recipes that kind of flopped, so skip them. I have my menu plans in there. I have shopping lists in there. I'll also write if I packed away certain pantry items for the following year to not buy for the next year. If I need serving forks, literally every little thing I write down in my notes app. And that just makes the following year so much easier.
Okay, I love this tip from Abby. And I can tell you that this is something that I also do. I write everything down in a notebook. And the tip also is like, don't think it's too small. Like, never too much detail. I used to think like, oh, I'll remember, like this something happens or I made something or there's a detail. And I'm like, don't worry, I'll remember. You will not remember. You will not remember in a year from now these little details about Pesach. So literally write everything down. It is a savior for your next year. Like, why reinvent the wheel? I have a notebook and I have every year I write down my menu. I write down what I made. I write down how long it took. I write down how many pans it made, how much was eaten, how much I had left, how many chickens did I clean, how many people came for the meals, was it enough, was it too much? It is the best thing to do. So, and write it down as you go along. Recipes, amounts, what you need to order for next year, what you ran out of. It is one of the best hacks and tips. And I'm so glad Abby shared this. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, it has saved my life. In the moment, you're just like, of course I'll remember this. No, you won't. You won't, you won't, you won't, you won't. And it is something that can save you from year to year. So if you learn anything, write everything down. Okay, last tip that I'm going to share is a message. It wasn't a voice note, but I really thought that it was so good that I'm going to share it anyway, even though it wasn't a voice note. And what she said was, take a deep breath and just start. And I really thought that that was really amazing, because I know for me that sometimes I get so overwhelmed and I'm like, I don't know where to start, and I spin myself in circles, and it's not like completely organized, and I have to start it like this, and I have to have this, and have to have all the ingredients to do this. And eventually you just have to start. And I promise you, like once you start, things will start to flow. I think the hardest thing is to start, is to just like take the plunge. And I really like love that like simple but profound little piece of advice. Like, get out of your head. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to be chaotic. It's not going to be exactly the way you wanted it to be. Take a deep breath and just start. And with that, I send all my love to all of you for all your Pesach preps. We are in it together. So we got this. Okay. And I hope listening to this podcast makes it a little easier. Every once in a while, check your social media, get some solidarity. There's recipes that people share. There's tips that people share. We're all in it together. There's something really beautiful about preparing for a holiday that takes so much effort, but knowing that you're not in it alone, and laugh about it. Try to bring the good, positive energy. We will all have the meltdowns. I always have a Pesach meltdown. It's inevitable, but just be okay with that. And then also remember that at the end of the day, this is a holiday that we get to celebrate. We are lucky to celebrate, and it represents our freedom as a collective nation and our own personal freedoms from whatever's holding us back. So I love you all, and we'll see each other on the other side.
Okay, so this podcast does not happen by itself. The magic takes a whole group of amazing people, and I want to tell you who those people are. So obviously I'm your host, Chavie. Our producer and creative director is Eli Ben-Chion. He keeps me on my toes. He makes sure that I just keep growing and am on point and don't miss a beat. He's the best. Audio is edited and mixed by Reed Seeley. Also, unbelievable. He's so cool, calm, and collected. You kind of need that working with me. And the music, which is beautiful, is by Basia Schechter and Shaul Magid. And this is Totally Unexpected.